as per usual, we sit down and we have our conversation that we call attempted intelligence. This time, the center of focus is going to be research specifically from Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. We've spoken about her before when we spoke about the theory of constructed emotion.
Right.
The research that I'm hoping to point at comes from before that.
Okay.
Right, so the theory of constructed emotion, essentially in its current iteration, I think was around 2018, something like that. She had another term for essentially the same concept previous to that. The specific research that we're going to point to, it I think was around 99 and was published early 2000s. So essentially what it is centering around experimental, quasi-experimental, it's not full experiment, it's essentially report over time, assaying the emotional expression or essentially the emotions through varying points of a given day and comparing between men and women.
Okay.
Because the social construct or the social concept over time is that in I don't think all cultures, but many cultures, is that women are more emotional than men.
Right.
Okay. So essentially the question is, are women observably more emotional than men? And in the information or in the research paradigm that Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett performed, and I've sent you this information.
Yep.
So I sent you a video, and you were very excited about like everything except this.
Yeah.
Very excited, and which I'm like, oh, that's cool. But what about this thing? Oh yeah,
That too.
yeah, cool. And you did read that paper. I think that paper is, he's having a bad day. She's emotional. She's so emotional.
Well, it was one of those things where it's like, he's having a bad day and she's a B word. You know what I mean?
But that's not the title, but I think the title is She's So Emotional.
Yeah, emotional.
Right?
Yeah.
It's okay, you can swear if you
I know, I feel like
I don't know if I said this on camera, but my father was in the U.S. Navy.
Yeah.
Right? So I can say, my father was a sailor.
Yeah,
swear like a sailor.
literally.
Well, this is the problem. My father was an avionics electrician.
Mm.
He worked... He was with Helicopter Squadron 1, which meant that he worked on the electrical portions of helicopters, right? He was capable and qualified to do other things, but he was specialized in helicopters. And he was also, as in many militaries, you have to be dual qualified. He was search and rescue qualified. I think he was on a boat in the Navy once or twice. His feet were firmly on land most of the time.
Right.
So, although I can say, my father was a sailor, I swear like a sailor. Well, and the only sailing experience that I'm aware he had was in the Burlington Bay, and he capsized a boat the first time out with my mother and my sister and watching from the shore, and my uncle in the boat.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so not much of a sailor. But I think that would give you reason to swear.
I would say a bad sailor is still a sailor.
Anyways. Moving on.
Yes.
So, what did you pick up from both that article, the research article, as well as the video with respect to, are women more emotional than men?
Well, based on the research that I got and the research that she was talking about, no, the women and men are not, on average,
Sure.
Women are not more emotional than men. On average, they are almost equal.
Essentially, they are equal.
Yeah.
If you were to, so the way that they collected this, I believe, essentially what they had was, I think they were almost like Palm Pilots or something like that, or something. It was almost like they got paged. So they would get paged at a regular frequency throughout the day, report your emotional state.
Right.
And you had men and you had women, and they would report their emotional state. And when looking at the data, if you were to look at the data plot, you would not be able to tell a woman from a man.
Yeah, when you're looking at the information.
You would suspect that as the data came in based on emotional reports, right? So the emotion itself, or are you currently emotional, right? You would expect, if this was true, that women would look very clear, men would look very clear.
Right.
That's not the case. What looked very clear is almost everybody was clustered in a fairly tight range, and then you had outliers. So you had very emotional men and very emotional women, and you had very unemotional men and very unemotional women.
So you can tell the difference between
very
emotional and non-emotional, but not based on gender.
I think the better term would be very.
Very.
Right, because you're trying to put it on a scale.
Fair enough.
So almost everybody's in the middle, emotional sugar, sometimes if I feel like it, I guess. Right, feel like it. And then you have people who seem to be very sensitive or very insensitive, such that they would claim to be feeling emotion more often. Whether or not they are observably emotional,
Right.
tough to say, right? But they will make that claim. So this is self-reported data at specific frequencies, such that based on that data, you can't tell men apart from women, right? You can tell somebody who's sensitive from somebody who's insensitive, or somebody who falls in the general middle, right? So
but not based on gender.
Yeah. So the idea would be that if there was something, you would be able to pull them apart. Like it would be very clear. Like you look at a data point, you're like, that's a woman, that's a man. It does not seem like that can be done. I don't know if anybody else has tried to replicate that or do it in a different way. There is something about emotional intelligence, right? We discussed this a little bit. So the idea being that emotional intelligence could be measured in varying ways. I don't know a ton about how you would measure emotional intelligence. I think there's going to be similar flaws to intelligence measures.
Is it possible to just kind of loosely say like awareness, like to?
For me to pin anything down is not reasonable. Right? But essentially, in whatever way that emotional intelligence is measured, you seem to be able to likely tell the difference between a male and a female, because it is claimed that broadly on those measures, whatever those measures are, however they're done, that women seem to display higher levels of emotional intelligence.
Intelligence, not emotions.
No.
Just to be clear.
Some level of understanding, probably some level of predictiveness, likely. But it doesn't mean they're more emotional. It seems like they're better able to interface with emotions. Is probably a way to say it. Now again, me being somewhat unaware of how it's measured, what those measurements look like, how they're captured, pinning it down isn't worth anybody's time from me right now. But when you look at intelligence measures, the idea is that intelligence is a stable quality for those measures to be as correct as we want them to be. However, within an individual across a lifetime, intelligence isn't stable. Right? Sometimes you get better at taking intelligence tests. Not more intelligent. So it's like, so intelligence measures don't seem to be as stable as we'd like them to be for the concept of intelligence to mean what we would hope it would, or what some could hope it would mean. But there is some evidence that suggests that as far as emotional intelligence is concerned, you could likely tell a woman apart from a man, at least in some settings, in some cultures. Maybe not all, right? Because it wouldn't have been done in all settings, in all cultures.
Right. It would be done in the current context.
The context in which it was done.
Right.
I don't know which one.
Yeah.
Like I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I haven't looked deeply at that.
Right.
The deal there being that there is some basic learning mechanisms that seem to be important. And it's somewhat highlighted by the research that I've done for my master's so far. Essentially...
Sorry, learning mechanisms in relation to emotion?
No, learning mechanisms.
Okay, period.
I don't know what they wouldn't apply to.
Okay.
If you're going to have no information, then have some. Or have some information, then have more.
Right.
There's some mechanisms that seem to be pretty stable. But the idea with... That seems to show from my somewhat, it's not a direct measurement of this, but it is reflected in a lot of other educational material, and you probably would have seen this, but basically learning is specific to content, right? Like there's a term, you drive the behavior that you test, right? So if I test getting the correct answer, that's what people get better at. If I teach getting the correct answer, people get better at that. If I teach suturing a certain way, people get better at that. If I don't teach suturing another way, they tend to be bad at that, right? Okay. So learning is specific to the content that is presented. If there is a cultural concept that women are more emotional, it may be the case that in broad strokes, not individuals, but in broad strokes, you may be more likely to assume that women would pay more attention to emotions and emotional states. Doesn't mean that they're more emotional. It just seems that you could predict, and there would be ways to test this, that women may be more likely to pay attention to emotions than males.
So just inside themselves and outside of themselves?
Yeah, and broadly, very broadly, not because anything that you say about a group does not predict the individual. Right? This can seem somewhat egotistical, right? But I've said this to you before. As far as emotional intelligence is concerned, based on the way that you and I interact and the way that we see each other interact with others, and I guarantee you that there are people that we both know that would not agree with what I'm about to say. But our emotional intelligence as individuals who happen to know each other, probably quite high.
Okay.
Right? We don't immediately jump down people's throats. We take them over like, wait a minute. Right? So you can be very mad at somebody and you don't go.
Right.
You're like, hold on. Right? And then you ask, wait a second, where is this coming from? You try to figure it out. As do I. Now, have I always done that? Probably not. I was a child at some point.
Yes.
As were you.
I was going to say, when I was younger, not so much.
But I would say that there's a case to be made for you and I as human males having fairly high emotional intelligence. Right?
Okay.
I guarantee there's people who are not going to agree. And that's fine.
Right.
There's literally no problem with that. And guess what? They might be more right than me.
Right.
It's entirely possible.
Yeah.
So, but it kind of coming back to that idea that those who pay attention to a concept are more likely to be more intelligent about it. So domain-specific knowledge.
Right.
How do you become an expert? Know more about the thing. How do you become an expert in emotions? Know more about emotions. Pay more attention to them. Interface with them more. Right? So that might be some of what it is.
Okay.
As far as emotional intelligence is concerned. But again, in at least a small semi-experimental setting, self-report, no, women are not more emotional than men, right? And if you hear that, okay, you can have an initial reaction. But if you pull back and you consider in your life, without naming names, and without telling stories, on simple account of the fact that if you tell a story, it's like naming a name, tell the person.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Who have you seen in your life that's more emotionally expressive? Like, have you seen an equal number of males and females who are emotionally expressive? Have you seen an unequal number? Have you seen only males be emotionally expressive? Like, what have you seen?
Just in my personal experience, I've exposed myself, I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but I've exposed myself to more females than males.
Just in social interactions?
In social interactions. Okay. But more generally, even though I've exposed myself to more females than males, the number is still very close in what
you've experienced.
In what I've experienced. Yeah. But the number is slightly higher in women because I feel like I've been exposed.
You've just been around more often.
Right.
When I use the term emotionally expressive, are you interpreting that in a way that's like their reactions are larger than you would expect for the situation? Is there another way you would describe that?
I can't think of it because you said that.
Sorry.
But when I was imagining it, I was imagining a range of emotions that are recognized as more extreme in general. So anger, sadness,
sure.
Frustration, just things where people are even just happy, excited. Things where people are expressing something, again, larger than the average.
On account of the fact that I haven't necessarily paid attention to who is or isn't more emotional, like I can't absolutely give what I would call a reasonable estimate. But my problem is that I see somebody whose reactions are larger than the situation would warrant, and that's what I remember. So I feel like most people I know, regardless of phenotypical description, are far more emotional than they have any reason to be. And to me, they're convinced that no, you should not do that. That is not right. And they're just having this really large expression. So it didn't even happen to you. It happened to me.
Yeah.
And why? I'm fine. Why are you freaking out on my behalf?
Right.
So my problem with discerning this in any reasonable way to try to separate one from the other is that I think most people show emotion that's much larger than the situation would warrant. Granted, that's probably a quirk of me, right? And I have to accept that. I'm probably the weirdo in most of those situations. I have emotions, but a lot of times for myself as an individual, I'm thinking, well, what's the point of expressing this at you? Or is there a way that this is going to come out? Right. What I tend to do in a lot of situations is I don't need to absolutely talk about the thing. I need to talk to a person.
Okay.
Because of that person, whoever they may be, has specific characteristics that when I interact with them, this problem solves itself. Now, it doesn't mean that I won't talk about things. I'll talk very directly about things, right? But I tend to interface with my emotions in a way where it's like, you know what? I need to talk to Mark. Right? About what? I need to talk to Mark because it will give me some insight into the processes. Yeah, sure, I might bring up the specific topic, right? Or I need to talk to Ed, right? Or I need to talk to my daughter, right? I just need my daughter to hang around a little bit, whatever it happens to be. That's more obviously a more recent development. She's only 8. It hasn't been my whole life, but that's at the points in my life that I would more likely experience strong emotions. That's what I did. Now, at this point, with what I think is growing knowledge about the world and how certain fundamental things work, I've always found almost everything funny. Now I find even more things funny. It's like, wow, that's hurting your feelings. Okay, cool. So I think it's funny.
Right.
And I have to figure out how to negotiate that without making you feel bad about you having feelings.
Yeah.
I have a clinical practice. Patients will come in legit pain. They are having problems. And in the way that I will interface with them, there's a lot of levity here. Well, you're already in pain. You're already suffering. Why should I sit here and be like, oh, that must be terrible. Like, that's gotta suck, huh?
Yeah.
Man, I hate it when my back hurts and I can't roll over. Like, it just, and then I gotta worry about like hitting my kid. Like, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like, oh. So there's been times.
But that's also relatable. Like, from my perspective, that's relatable.
Yeah, like, you're a weirdo like me. So that we're not the people to talk to about the general population.
Right.
We're probably on some end of the spectrum.
Well, it makes me wonder, just in my youth, it was always questioned about my emotions. So if someone was just observing me, they would say, Mark, are you okay? And I would say, why do you ask? And they go, well, you don't look happy.
So they think you look.
Right?
Why are you talking about your emotions?
Well, and that's the thing, right? So like, you don't look happy, and then I have one friend who actually gets upset at me because I acknowledge that he tells me something that's funny, but I don't laugh. Yeah. So I say, that's funny.
Is that a friend or?
It's a friend.
Okay. Okay. Well, I appreciate that you made the distinction. I was going to say something else, and then I'm like, no, shut up, Sam. Okay.
But no, it does emphasize the fact that slightly abnormal in the sense that I don't perceive emotions and things, situations
in the way that people want you to.
Yes.
I hate that. So one of the things that I remember saying at quite a young age, or a feeling that I had, and then it became something that I articulated more clearly as I aged, and now it's exceedingly clear.
Okay.
So the experience where somebody's telling you about something and you're not absolutely showing the response that they want, and they're like, you know you love it.
Oh.
Right? Why are you doing that right
because I feel like I know the response.
It's just like, oh, why did you say that around him? Is that
yeah, pretty much.
I feel really bad. Are you saying you feel really bad whoever said that around me?
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right? So it was probably my early to mid 20s when I started to say this out loud. I'm like, you do not get to tell me how I feel about anything. Not once, not ever, not now. There was periods where I was having hard times with certain things, and people would be like, just put a smile on your face. And in my head it was like, all I could think of was Denzel Washington when he got game, just like, not a throat punch, because those are very different. This. Just like, it's right in their throat. And it happened in my mind. I didn't do it. And I was like, you smile. But outside of me, I said, give me a reason to smile and I will. Otherwise, don't ask. I said that to people who would claim to care about me. Right? And guess what? They probably did care about me. Just not in the way that would work for me.
Right.
But again, maybe not common in that sense.
Right. Again.
So I've seen this in my daughter. She's like, no, you don't get to tell me how to feel. She for a period of time where she took it a little far, because I think I probably implanted this idea in her head just through general conversation and how I would respond to certain things. and she started to say, very clearly, she would be saying something to me. I'm like, no, that's really, like, I'm not sure that that's how you actually feel about that things. You're not me, you don't know how I feel. Like, you're correct. However, all of these pieces of evidence point to you not feeling the way that you claim.
Right.
Because these things aren't matching, right? So she seems to have pruned that a little bit, because maybe she says it to other people, just not me. Maybe.
She gets away with a lot of things with other people that she doesn't get away with you, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's been point blank questions like, do you purposely manipulate the emotions to get what you want? Yeah. Like, do you do it with me? Doesn't work very good. Okay. And there was a witness to that. Somebody did see that. So, but to kind of come back to the concept that at least within the broad culture that you and I exist in, so we call that North American culture, there is evidence to say that no, women and men are not discernibly different with respect to how often they're in heightened emotional states. Right? There are highly emotional men, highly emotional women, highly unemotional men, highly unemotional women, and then most everybody's kind of stuck in the middle.
Right.
Do you think that with what you saw from the video and from what you were able to glean from the research paper, that's entirely satisfactory evidence and that should hold true everywhere?
Well, no.
Okay.
I mean, I had mentioned it off camera as well, but it doesn't seem like she was overly confident with that being a finite answer as well.
I just need to point to what you're saying right now is what you're about to describe is good scientific behavior.
Okay.
So when you're saying she wasn't overly confident, you're talking about a mix of three things that was presented in a talk.
Right.
Not necessarily this specific topic.
One specific topic.
Okay. So just first of all, we start there.
That's fair.
And then continue to say what you're going to say, because otherwise I'm going to basically knock you off that course.
Okay. I just wanted to say that she wasn't.
She is Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Yes, sorry. She wasn't saying that this is done and this is the solution, but she
was saying that about
three things, which was faces, gender, and the brain, how it's all kind of
in relation to affect.
Correct.
Yeah.
So she really just said, this is new information this is information that we've gathered, and this is information that we can use to move forward in development, in creating more understanding on this domain, this topic of affect. And because of all that, and what I've gathered from skimming the readings as well, no, I don't agree that this can be settled and just spread across universally.
Yeah. So more information would need to be gathered.
Yes.
Would you say that it's a reasonable start to say, yeah, no, men and women not that different as far as their emotional expressiveness?
Yeah, I can say that.
Now, could you say that in different cultures it can look different? Because there's another piece of information you're already aware of that probably points in that direction. So theory of constructed motion.
You mean so the expression of motion can look different in different cultures?
So it can look different between men and women, between a man and a woman, between men and women of different cultures. So men in one culture express emotion different than men in another culture. Would you say that there's something there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that seems to map well onto the theory of constructed emotion, where there is an emotional word that has a variety of expressions. It's not like they're all over the place. They're still pretty tightly grouped in relation to one emotional term, but there's a variety of expressions related to any given emotional term.
Right.
It is not stable within an individual, between individuals, between cultures.
Right.
It's just not stable. Right. So there's a variety, right? So the idea being that no, people are different, right? You can pick individuals apart from one another, but you can't pick men apart from women.
Right.
It's very unlikely, especially in the same culture.
Yes.
Right. There might be some cultures where it would maybe be more notable, but in the broader context of all humanity, it would kind of regress to the mean.
Right? Is it fair to say that every individual they're different?
Yeah.
And whether you're a man or woman, you are an individual, so you're different. So you can't group
Well, you contribute to the group observation.
Right.
The individual contributes to the observation of the group, but the group doesn't predict the individual.
Right.
Right? So you can separate the individual from the group, right? Like, but it's kind of, I don't necessarily know how to word this properly in a succinct way, but basically the group, an individual that is part of a group, right, will show some expression of what that group is.
Right.
But the group doesn't predict the individual. Like the individual is clear and separate from the group.
Right.
But they contribute to the observation of the group.
Right.
Right. But
I feel like it's almost like a mini culture, something where you're sharing that behavior because you're culturally in that group.
So any group would be like that.
Right.
Right. And sometimes every individual is part of multiple groups, so they show characteristics of all of them.
Of multiple, yeah.
Right. But none of them predict the individual.
Right.
So predict what you could expect from the individual. So yeah, just generally, the individual is probably the more important unit of interaction. The group distinction might have some value, but at least in the terms of emotion, there is no group distinction.
Right.
Right. The group distinction might be expression, like so actual behavior in relation to an emotional category between cultures.
Okay.
But the incidence of that emotion is probably no different.
Right.
It's probably just about the same, especially in relation to the group.
Right.
What you're going to see is most people clustered, and then some outliers.
Right.
But that's what you see in almost anything.
I was going to say, there's
Right,
going
it's
to
kind
be,
of a statistical norm.
even outside of the topic we're talking about.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, wait. So there are some abstract concepts that continue to happen again and again. Shit. Goddamn positivism. Right? It's like, yeah, but we're talking about individuals. Okay, constructivism if I have to. But it's what
Yes.
talks about it better. Anything else to add to that? Are you satisfied?
I'm satisfied at this time.
All right. Fantastic.